Good afternoon, welcome to the session. My name is Morgan, I work at Microsoft. I work as a technical evangelist, and I have the pleasure of spending time with partners and with customers, working on and evangelizing really about our platform. So Windows Server, whether it be on-premises, whether it be in Windows Azure, or whether we use System Center to manage all those components. And over the last 6 to 9 months or so, started to work quite a lot closer with developers to understand this whole DevOps movement that is on the go at the moment. So I have a specialization in kind of those areas. So the title of this is the Agile End-to-End Story of Developers and IT Professionals. It's quite a long title, and I had to have interesting discussions to have the title put in because it's quite a long one. So there's a bit of a play on a few terms there. Firstly, the word Agile, and then playing with developers and IT pros, all in the same sentence. And that is the key topic that I kind of want to work on in the first 5 or 6 or 7 minutes in the session today, just to position quite a few key components and then climb across into the tool sets and have a look at the integration components and see the experiences across all of them. Maybe a show of hands in the room, just so I can understand exactly the audience. Who are IT professionals? You work with Windows Server, you work with System Center, and you fight with users. Okay. Developers. Okay. Cool. So you work with code and you fight with IT pros. Okay. And technical decision makers, so IT managers. Okay. And you deal with the previous guys every day and you fight with them, basically. Okay. I asked that question because it helps me just frame certain of the components as I go through the session today. It helps me just understand how to position certain components. And I think it's a good split 50, well, I'm not 50-50 because there's three questions there, but it's a good split between IT pro and dev and from a technical decision maker as well. So what are we going to do in this agenda? Well, firstly, I'd like to spend 2 or 3 minutes just giving you a view of Microsoft's view of DevOps and this movement, this developer operations, because very much for the last few years, like cloud, DevOps has been thrown about quite a bit in the last year or 2 or 3, since it's really started to become mainstream as an acronym. And then look at this new Microsoft framework that we're currently working on. It's kind of evolving, and I think it'll be evolving going forward. Just to understand where do we actually position IT professionals, where do we position developers, where does business sit across all of that, how do they interact, how do they work? And then once we've understood that framework, I'm going to slot in the System Center and the Visual Studio tools to show you where they kind of sit currently and what our view is of going forward, especially with some of the announcements we've made this week around the tool set from a Visual Studio perspective and from a PowerShell perspective as well. That'll be the first, say, first 10 minutes or so, and then I want to break into kind of the nuts and bolts between the technologies, the actual consoles and the tools, to understand how do I first integrate those components. So if I'm an IT professional and I want to assist or enable my developers, how do I integrate System Center into Visual Studio? If I'm a developer, how can I go back and speak to my IT professionals who are running the System Center thing and say, please, I'd like to enable, I'd like to integrate, I want to get more value out of what you have currently got running in the infrastructure from a platform and from a management perspective. This little I, information I, you'll see it pop up now and then along through the slides. There is quite a vast amount of content when you start to look at DevOps and you look at Microsoft tool sets from a System Center and from a Visual Studio perspective. So kind of what we've done is put quite a bit of content into the notes section of this deck. So when you download the PowerPoint or you come grab it afterwards from me, either way, you'll find there's a lot of URLs in those particular slides. And those URLs will give you the step-by-step guides, the how-tos, how do I configure, how do I integrate, what are the things I need to take into account when I start to possibly put the Visual Studio test agent into a baked image within VMM. How do I do that? What are the ways, the procedures, and what are the gotchas? So that'll be in the notes section. And I think as you'll see, the next 75 minutes are going to go really quickly. Ideally, please pull this deck down and pull out the pieces you need for your particular role, as well as your engagement and when you discuss with either one of those personas. Now, I'm going to show this one slide just to give you a view. And if you attended David's session yesterday or you attended our pre-conf on Sunday, you would have seen this one slide. And it's ready to position the 3 questions I asked the audience a few minutes ago. Who is business? Who is developer? Who is IT pro? And this is the common scenario. And if this does not relate to you, please put your hand up when I'm finished showing the slide. And then I'd love to come and shake your hand and then just understand exactly how you've got all this magic to work without experiencing what I'm about to show you. So if we look at this business and developer, business requires updates, new features, new iterations, changes to applications as the business evolves. As the business makes money and starts to do its normal day-to-day processes, it wants to evolve the application side as well. And that puts pressure back on developers. Firstly, faster versions have to come out, quicker updates, faster return on fixing bugs, et cetera, et cetera. So development becomes kind of stuck in an area where they need to work really quickly to push out faster results. And the life cycle of application development has changed in the last year or so around faster return and faster feature sets coming out. On the other side is our friendly IT pro, saying, well, you're just throwing the stuff over the wall and the updates are getting done, but I'm bearing the brunt on the other side. I'm getting the users phoning me saying, hey, this doesn't work, I don't see this. Possibly I'm seeing performance impact on the infrastructure where the application is running, whether it's on premises, whether it's public, whether it's a hybrid version of the cloud, doesn't really matter. But the IT operations are starting to get impacted based on these new iterations, new versions, or servers popping up all of a sudden that have gone from dev environments to production environments overnight, and there's users working on them. So little things like that become a real pain for all three personas, but it is reality. It really is reality across all these pieces. And ideally, the developers want to become more agile. They want to work faster. They want to get code out quicker. They want to get fixes out quicker, updates out quicker, feature sets out quicker. However, on the other side, IT Pro, which is this big cost center where business is investing money, is trying to keep the lights on, fighting fires, handling grumpy users. Understand they might not have a massive budget and need to have newer hardware refreshes. They don't get quite the ability to have. So how do they scale out what they've existingly got? At the same time, cater for developers to say, hey, you have some infrastructure, go and dev, go and test. Whereas opposed to, we don't have infrastructure, that's your problem. So they go and buy their own servers, they spin up some Azure instances, and they do their own work anyway. Either way, the work's getting done. The problem is we want to bring this whole DevOps movement closer and allowing the collaboration between all three of these personas. And that's sometimes a piece that's missed when you hear this word DevOps. It's just development operations. But what about the business? And we have got quite a key message going to be coming out in the next 6 to 12 months around Microsoft's movement towards this DevOps framework. Is business is an integral piece along the whole way. And as I go through the next few slides, you'll see how that gets positioned as I show you the technologies and who the key role players are along that way. So when I show you some of the consoles, what are the concepts to discuss when you speak to business as an IT pro? When a developer wants to speak to the IT pro, how does he engage with the business? How does the IT pro get involved with the business and develop in the planning phase? Before it just gets thrown over the wall and it's an application to be supported. So these three phases, or these three personas, is really a takeaway for you to understand all three play an important role within this DevOps motion. Now I'm going to be stepping through a few consoles. I'm going to be showing you System Center, I'm going to be showing you Visual Studio, and I'm going to be moving between both of them. I really don't want the developers to go, oh, the System Center thing, don't show me that, go back to the tools console. And I don't want the IT pro to go, hey man, go back to the System Center console, don't show me this Visual Studio thing. I want to see more of that piece over there. So what I've done is I've brought this with me for anyone that really struggles for the next 60 minutes or so. Okay. If you're going to hyperventilate when you see System Center up there as a developer, or if you're going to struggle as an IT pro when you see Visual Studio, please walk up, grab this bag, and just mildly blow into it slowly. And just breathe. And you'll realize that actually it's not so bad to understand all these tools and components that are in here. It really isn't. But it is a key, we jest at this, but it is a key message, because if you don't understand what the tools are doing on the other side as an IT pro, and you don't understand what the IT pros have got on their side as a developer, you can't have this conversation. And it's never going to work, and you're never going to move towards it. So yes, I joke about this, please take it easy and breathe as we go through the next 60 minutes or so. But really, as a takeaway, the understanding is you need to engage more and more with each other on the other side, and that is going to be our framework coming out more and more. So now if you look at the slide, is anyone not experiencing this currently? This is here, please, feel free. Is anyone not experiencing this? Okay. And unfortunately, that is reality. The last 6, yes. You're not experiencing. Awesome. I want to come shake your hand later because I want to finish on with this. But I'd love to understand your role in all of that on the other side. Maybe just the customer on the other side. I always forget about those guys on the other side. And the key thing is, we would joke about that as well, but the customer is also your user. And your user might be accessing your application, having problems. That is the customer. He might not be paying for the service, but he's using the service. Okay, so let's have a quick look at 3 more slides, then move across to the console. This will relate to operations firstly, and it'll be a positioning to understand from a development perspective. These are true stats that have come out around really, from a people and process perspective, how is downtime affected and where the results come from. And there's a big split between the two at the top. Application failure and operation error. And that is something we'll never get away from. Ideally, we want to minimize as much as possible along that way. The bottom piece, other, which is about 20%, really comes down to hardware and experience around maybe a service provider who provides services around telecommunications or networking. But the key piece of here is people are very important. And so is the process, how those people work from a day-to-day perspective. Now, as operations, do people in the room who is familiar or uses ITIL, uses ITSM, those kind of acronyms, those kind of pieces? It's a process-driven way of working. However, sometimes development are not subject to those in the business. And so ideally, we're going to start to spend more and more understanding these three concepts. From a people perspective, how do I leverage my existing investment I've made in IT Pro and developers? So if you're the business person sitting in the room, I'm not going to go out and hire a new DevOps person. I want to understand from IT Pro and Dev, who can I leverage, who know my infrastructure, who understand my applications, and know what my business is about. Opposed to employing a DevOps person who's going to come in, and what's the first 6 months going to be? It's going to be, I need to understand your infrastructure, I need to understand your applications, and I need to understand your business. So now we have this period of delay. So let's not move down this road so quickly of employing this DevOps person. At the same time, let's understand our internal processes. And again, it goes back to the very first pillar. Those are the best people who understand the current processes that you have as a business, the IT professional and the developer. So again, let's mold our current processes into this framework that I'm going to be spending the next 60 minutes or showing you. And then we'll focus on the products. And I'll move between the different consoles, the different concepts, and I'm going to relate to you some of the experiences that I've had over the last 6 or 9 months with engaging with enterprise customers who are moving down this road using our tool sets. All right, so as operations, how do you actually assist and climb into accelerating and enable developers? The first component is accelerating delivery. If you as an operations person can assist a developer spin up an infrastructure quicker so he can do his different variety of tests, that brings down the time to release an application. That enables the developer to obviously be a lot more successful. If we move into the second stage of optimizing resources, the real world is that not everyone has brand new SANs, brand new servers, brand new infrastructure. And developers need infrastructure to code on, to test on, to work with. And ideally, if we can't provide that as an IT professional, they're going to go and find it somewhere else. They're going to go find it either way. There's no doubt about that. So how do we actually work together to optimize the existing resources we have, so have control as IT, but make developers dynamic on the other side, so they can leverage a controlled environment? Improving availability, SLA and metrics. All three of those personas have metrics, whether it be on uptime for servers, whether it be on releases of application, or from a business perspective, the return on the investment with IT and Dev providing the core components for the money that they've invested in. And the last piece, increasing quality. There's no point doing the first three and you're throwing out a horrible version of an application. That kind of defeats this whole purpose. So at the end of the day, the business starts to get a return because the customer sees the benefit from an improved quality of service. Again, it could be a user, it could be finance, it could be HR, it could be an e-commerce website. It doesn't really matter. But those four key areas are where we look at the bottom, saying how does IT support developers to start to push out better iterations of code and allow the business to recoup the benefit of their investment along the way, with all three winning at the end of the day. So those kind of four areas is a good takeaway to understand where do I fit into that and where do I possibly have gaps in my current environment as IT or as a developer or as business, and where do I need to go and have a discussion with the other parties along this journey. Okay, so looking at this framework that we've kind of been working on for the last few months. If you look from left to right, this is kind of the flow. So as an IT pro, you might not know, or you might hear about the first few stages. And as a developer, you might have heard about or understand a little bit on the right-hand side. But ideally, there's a flow between the different phases, whether you are storing code, whether you're creating your builds, whether you're doing a variety of different types of testing, whether you're releasing out into production, or whether you're going to be supporting from operations perspective, or you're underlying your process across all of those. So traditionally, the flow is kind of simple. All three personas have a key area to play. They all have a value piece to play. And as I go through the three demonstrations this afternoon, I will highlight who gets to really be the key role player in that section and how the other two should play a key component along the way from a support perspective. So yes, central source repository, a drive really from operations to say, well, let us help you from a security perspective, lock down and control who has access to parts of the code, which at the end of the day helps developers keep control of changes to code, updates to code, etc., opposed to local security permissions. Let's start to possibly integrate into Active Directory. Let's start to use those benefits in Visual Studio and within release management. Leverage the investment that IT has in AD and the control they have around AD and put it into the tools on the other side. And as we move across, how do we enable the developers when they start to create their builds and run through the variety of test phases? How do we start to give them the required infrastructure and services they need to do those key components? Then when the release piece comes, so right, we throw it over the wall, and you run with it operations. Here's the MSI, here's the executable, here's the scripts, here's whatever it is. Deploy. Use the tool, deploy it, and we will see you with the next version. From an operations perspective, how do I support that and where do I put that application? Do I put it on premises? Do I put it in public? Do I put it across both cloud scenarios? Now, normally, development goes, push it out. The users need it. The customers need it. And operations go with and work within whatever parameters they have around the infrastructure they have at the time. But the reality is, and I'm sure you've seen this the last few days, is the hybrid story is key from a Microsoft perspective as well as a customer perspective. How do I leverage the key components I need when I require them? And you'll see the tool sets from a System Center Visual Studio perspective will start to give you the ability to push to both scenarios as you see fit, or as the developer see fit, or as the business sees fit from a budgeting perspective. And this slide kind of takes that same explanation now and drops the Microsoft tool sets into that. Now, obviously, those tool sets will start to evolve as we've seen some of the updates that have come out on Monday as well as yesterday from a PowerShell perspective. They'll start to evolve, and integration will start to grow across all of those, whether it be on-premise, whether it be in public, or whether it be open source support as well. So huge passion from a Microsoft perspective, from an open source view of whether it's a virtual machine, whether it's code, whether it's tool sets that tie into our existing tools as well. We are embracing open in a really large way. Okay, so let's climb into the first section first. Automated build and test options. What do we have in this area to play on that left-hand side as operations to support developers? So let's have a quick look at the integration between Team Foundation Server and Virtual Machine Manager. I'll spend a quick 1 minute showing you how the configuration works to integrate the two and what the results are. And then we'll climb and look at and see what the developer's experience is using those tools, and how do we control that from the System Center side from a VMM perspective. And what are some key takeaways that we can possibly have to use within Virtual Machine Manager to enable developers to really work a lot simpler. Then we'll have a look at some of the nuts and bolts of those pieces. How do I use things like role-based access control to start to implement some sort of form of security, some sort of access permissions to help me as operations later when I start to audit or I start to track a problem? How do I know who did what on the other side in this developer and operations integration piece? And then how do we start to look at the actual profiles and templates we have within Virtual Machine Manager to make it available to the developers on the other side when they start to release their code out in those different phases? This one piece over here is a key takeaway for IT pros. The traditional life cycle of an application works through a few phases. It goes from plan, goes from develop, goes into release, into operate, and we learn, and that cycle carries on. Traditionally, operations or IT get involved kind of in the middle when we get the application possibly, or developer asks for some infrastructure to start deploying their code to in a testing fashion. Ideally, we're encouraging IT pros get involved one stage earlier, in the planning stage. So when business sits down with developer and says, I would like my new application to look like this, with these following components, and the developer walks away and starts writing that code, as IT, you should be there as well going, well, where's this code going to run? Do you want it on premises? Do you want it in the public cloud? What infrastructure do you need? What configuration do you need? When you're in the dev phase, what parameters do you need? When you move to production, can we scale those up? Do you want to do some more testing? Opposed to just getting it and moving forward. So one key nugget is for IT pros to start getting involved in the beginning piece and the planning phase. And it's going to start to make a bit more sense as I climb through the different demos, where I'll reference where you're going to complete something. It doesn't help completing it when the developer comes to you with the application. You need to have those components done already before they come across to that piece. And you can only do that once you have the information from the planning phase. The last piece we'll look at in this demonstration is what is the experience of using the infrastructure that IT has now provisioned with this integration between TFS and VMM, and what is the benefit to a developer, and what is the benefit to the IT pro on the other side. And that's kind of the first 20 minutes or so from a demonstration perspective to see that build up and the experience across both. Remember, if you see System Center and you're a developer and you're struggling to breathe, there's the bag. Okay. If you're a developer and you see System Center, please feel free to use it. Same way on the other side. If I show you the tools, bear with me. You can make it. I'm sure you can. It's only 20 minutes. But if you don't understand what each other is doing, it's very hard to ask the questions when you start to integrate and start to work through this DevOps movement. Okay. Okay, so I've got one server here which has got TFS running, and it's integrated with Virtual Machine Manager. And I want to show you the two key components that an IT pro needs to understand to do the integration. But for that piece to work, we obviously need to understand from a development perspective what is available for me to use on the other side as an IT pro. So the first key piece to look at is within the actual TFS admin console is once I configure lab management and the integration between TFS and VMM, I also have the ability of doing network isolation. So the biggest fear for IT pros sometimes is that developers are going to put stuff on my infrastructure and it's going to move or talk or communicate on my production network. And so they kind of limit, or they say, yeah, here's your whole server, do whatever you want, and you're not connected to our production network. So very isolated in an island. So if you do this integration between TFS and VMM, you have two things you need to complete. One is, what is the FQDN for the VMM server? And the second one is, what VLAN do you want to use to isolate the network when a developer decides to do some network isolation with regards to his environments that he builds? That VLAN obviously is going to come from IT or from the networking guys on the IT side. But unless we understand that developers might need to use it or not use it, it's kind of hard to complete this component. Again, in the planning phase, where do you want to build your environments? Well, I want to build a copy of what I have in production. Right, so we want to isolate your network. Tick box done in the workshop, straight away in the planning phase. We'll get to this section, we know the answer, we know what the route we want to go down. So one little key step, we put these two components in. It then enables the relevant tab I'm going to show you next that allows you to configure what resources developers are allowed to get access to. So once I've done that piece of adding the FQDN in and the actual VLAN, and I move back to the actual project collections, I now have a new tab available to me, which is the lab management tab. Within that component, I start to configure the host groups and the libraries that this collection is allowed to have access to. And that's talking directly back to my library and my host groups within Virtual Machine Manager. Now, if I wanted to have control as IT, I would start to build out a library with the relevant artifacts inside of it the developers need access to. How do I know what artifacts go inside of that? Well, in the planning phase, I understood, what do you want to have when you do your testing? Well, I need Windows Server 2008 R2, I need Windows Server 2012, I need Windows 7, I need Windows 8, I need a service pack, I need these scripts. Yes, this application executable that I'm going to run, I need this version of SQL, I need these license keys, I need all those pieces. Once you have an understanding of all those pieces, I can start to populate the artifacts in the library. Once I add the library over here, the developer, when he uses his tools in a few minutes, he will have access to all of those components without stepping outside of his boundary. He won't be able to go from that to my production library, possibly, on the other side. And the same for my host groups. I can start to apportion which host groups they're allowed to deploy their environments to. So very simple to run through these wizards. Add, done. But unless you understand the key components to put inside of that within Virtual Machine Manager, this provides no use to the developer when he starts to access and use his tools. For Team Foundation Server to talk to Virtual Machine Manager, the relevant service account that gets used within TFS, over here, just needs to be a member of the administrators group on VMM side. And that is it. Now the communication happens. The next piece that takes over is the role-based access control within VMM, and we'll play through that in a few minutes. Then we decide which security groups within AD has access to which templates and which components within Virtual Machine Manager. In these collections, I can start to break out as many as I want in this location over here. There's no limit in that sense. But ideally, if I start to build out a huge amount of library shares, I now start to make it very complicated to support. That then becomes an IT operation going, well, now I've got to support all these libraries. That defeats this purpose. We want to make and enable developers to be dynamic. So try and limit the amount of libraries you have in here. And I've seen quite a long list of libraries in some customers. It becomes a nightmare to manage. And eventually, IT kind of steps away and stops managing it. Developer goes, well, I haven't got the latest components in my library. I'm not going to use that anymore. I'm just going to build my stuff over here. And we start to break that model all the way down down to the bottom. So yes, there is requirements to obviously keep this up to date and look after it, but the more you put in here, the longer it takes to look after and the harder it will be from that perspective. Okay, so very simple step, configure. If I have the answers, I have the nuts and bolts in place, I can assign and apportion that immediately. If I now move back and I have a look at, once that integration is done, and I jump across to Virtual Machine Manager, I start to get a few extra clouds built on the other side. So Visual Studio Lab Management with either a GUID or a name that you want to give it on the other side. That becomes the actual cloud where the actual resources will start to reside. So now I can apply conditions to those clouds as well, from a resourcing perspective, from access perspective. But those are automatically created when you've done the first connection and you start to do your first deployment of an environment. Once you import your templates across, you will have these automatically created on the other side. So if you do see this VSLM underscore and a GUID on the other side, which is the first one, either rename it or make a change or deploy it with a different name, it's up to you. But that's where the actual components will start to reside when we start to deploy these environments. If I step back now and say, well, what is this process now? We've done the integration, I've got my pieces in play, and as a developer, I want to start using these components. What is required? So if I open up Microsoft Test Manager, this is my access into my environment, either from a testing perspective or from a building out environment perspective. There's two key areas I want to focus on the top, on the tabs, is the lab component, where I build out my environments, and then the library piece, where I start to populate my artifacts that I can use as a developer when I build my environments out. So if we step into the library first, and I do an import, I get a question straight away saying, well, which VM or template do you want to import from VMM on the other side? If you don't see this and it's grayed out, the configuration hasn't happened on the other side with the integration with TFS and VMM. If I say browse, it gives me a view again based on my permissions, as in this case Morgan, the administrator. So I get to see two different types there. I get to see the development one and the production one. So as the administrator in VMM, I have full access. I can see everything. If I logged in as developer 01, I would only see the dev components. I would not see the production templates available to me. But you'll notice the key thing between this is that my naming convention is quite prescriptive. I've gone with quite a prescriptive naming convention in my templates. In the last, I say, 6 months of working with this and working with customers, that is one of the biggest drawbacks to this piece of integration, is if I just have default naming templates as an IT pro, developer comes across and goes, well, I don't quite know what this is, it takes me a bit longer, right, deploy it. Let me check, has it got .NET in it? Has it got IIS? Does it have SQL? I actually don't know, let me have a login, let me have a look. Over time, that stops again a developer using this environment or this integration. So a little nugget or takeaway, start to do your naming conventions to be quite prescriptive. The components that sit within those templates, start to list them out, and we'll see how that works in a few minutes. But this piece over here, if we don't position this correctly, it'll stop developers using these components from within Virtual Machine Manager. If I go and select one of these now and just say add, I've got a very simple key description put in here. It's a base OS, there's nothing else inside of this. I select my default role. The role becomes important when I start to process my builds and I push my code out. I assign certain scripts to certain roles within my environment. I would need to pick that here. But then again, this is the developer side of things that would happen. If I say next, this is all grayed out for me. The selections are done. I can't actually put anything in from a developer perspective. The templates are done within Virtual Machine Manager side. If I say next, get a review of what I have in my environment, say finish. And all I've done is I've imported that VM template and I've stored it in the library within from Virtual Machine Manager, and I've put it in my lab, in my Microsoft Test Manager's library. Now the next piece is actually building out my environments. I do have a few environments here, and we'll come back to them in a few seconds. But ideally, I would say new, and I'm going to leverage the templates that I have in my library in Microsoft Test Manager. Are you deploying a standard or a VMM one? I'm going to be deploying a Virtual Machine Manager template, which then allows me to use the VSLM and cloud and position my actual servers in that area. We can just call this, call it TechEd North America, keep it simple. Now, what do you want inside of this environment? Again, I have a view back to my actual templates that I saw a little bit earlier. So I want a Windows 8 machine and I want a Windows Server machine. Add to environment, it's on the other side. I can name these whatever I want. This was the client. Or if you have OCD like me, you name it again and again until it's right. And we'll just call the server. And this one didn't have a role when I imported the template. So now it's saying, well, you have to fill in this category of assigning it a role. If I do a quick drop down, what is it? Well, let's just call it a web server. Say next. All my configurations kind of grayed out. I can't use them. Have a look at my server one. Have a look at the product key. My key is grayed out, and my key is inside of that. Now, this is where we start to play a little bit of magic from a licensing perspective. As an IT pro, do I want my volume licensing key in this dev environment, or do I want my MSDN keys put inside of that? Or do I want an evaluation version of the software being used? Because now I start to control the ability of a developer to move this into production using volume licensing software, or using MSDN software on the other side, and start to get a bit of massive configuration drift on my licensing side. It's a small little example, but when it comes to the business, I understand what has happened from a licensing perspective, and I know what's happening from a software perspective in my production and development environments. So small things like these become a bigger item to discuss in the planning phase as well. So which keys would you like to use? What software would you like to use? Well, I need these versions. Great. Here's the eval ISOs in your VMM library that you can call on and use when you need them. Again, I'm not touching volume licensing software as an example. Say next. Do I want to enable network isolation? This comes back to what I showed you when we did the integration. If yes, it'll use that VLAN and it'll deploy out to that component. So we won't say yes to that now. Say next. Get a review of what I have in my environment. Yes, are you happy that this is going to be deployed? Say next. And say verify. All it's going to do now is run through a set of checks. Is this environment, is it unique in your Microsoft Test Manager? And are there any naming conflicts between what you've selected for these servers in your environment? If I say finish, off it goes and deploys those servers now. If I go back to Virtual Machine Manager on the other side and I jump into my actual jobs, it's starting to build those machines in the relevant cloud on the other side. So I've jumped between the two components, but as a developer, I've just stayed here within the tool set that I know, and I work within the tool set I know, and I use the profiles and the templates and the clouds and the library that I've been assigned within Virtual Machine Manager. So at no stage have I now had to phone IT, speak to IT, ask them for anything. That piece is done. It's all done in the planning phase. The only key missing piece here might be an actual workflow. So I want to build this environment. I might need to log a request, create a ticket, and that is where the process and tools come into play, your existing tools. How do I tie that process into what I've shown you over here now? But now, of what use is this to me as a developer? So my environment's built, it's out and running. So we'll let that one carry on. I'll use one of the existing ones that's open here at the moment. I can now do a quick connect. That'll give me a view using either the Microsoft Environment Viewer, or it'll allow me to use RDP into one of those machines. So now at this point, I, as a developer, can start to work on those machines from the tools I know. If I need to log onto these servers within the environments, I can use this tool. I can log in, do some changes, make some changes, run some tests, and get some results, and then change my application as I see fit. Again, at no stage have I had to go and speak to IT, change any permissions from an RDP perspective. Those pieces should have been discussed and handled in the planning phase and done already from an access control perspective between Virtual Machine Manager and TFS. And the last piece, which is a bit of a wary piece for IT pros, is the ability to actually start creating snapshots. So a developer can now go and start to build his own snapshots from here and say, right, well, I want to run this test on my application. Before I do it, I'm going to create a snapshot. Hyper-V creates a snapshot, does his tests, fails. Okay, well, roll back. Or it's passed, great, create another snapshot, move forward for the next version and carry on. At no point has he had to speak to IT. So now we need to build another process in to go, right, how do I clean up all these relevant snapshots? Because the developer can just go and build snapshot, 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 and we'll just start to build out an environment. Again, we're not taking a full copy of that environment, so we're just doing the differences between those versions. But we need to have housekeeping and play with that as well on the other side. And that is where you start to look at Orchestrator, so System Center Orchestrator, providing value of integrating across TFS and VMM to ensure that the housekeeping is done from a snapshot perspective, as well as from an environment perspective. So I'm spinning up an environment. Who cleans up those servers? Who makes sure that we don't have some VM sprawl along the way? Well, I need to have a process running that goes and checks that, goes and sees exactly what is happening. If it's running over more than 30 days, do we start a workflow that emails a project manager, emails business, emails the developers saying, you've had this environment running for 30 days, no one's used it. Do you still need it, yes or no? No. Great, delete. So that's a process piece that you'll have to tie into existing tools that you have in your environment to ensure from an end-to-end perspective that is looked after and catered for. Okay, so great, up until this point, I've got my environment built out. I can use it as I see fit. Now, if I want to take one last step, which is going back to my actual tools components of Visual Studio, and I want to work with my actual builds and target those environments now, I'm not going to take you through all of this. I'm going to step you through the actual process piece itself. From a processing perspective, where do you actually want to run all of these components? And it really is, pick the environment we just deployed as an example. Select the servers in your environment that you want. Where's your drop locations? Where's your code sitting? Where are your builds sitting? And where do you want to target and run these against? So if I step through that wizard now, say, right, I want to run it through my environments. Select which environment you want. Go the TechEd North America one. Do you want to revert back to a snapshot? Now, they've been making their snapshot, so now the developer has a choice again. Yes, select that snapshot and run the tests against that for me, please. Pass, fail, and then go down the relevant path after that. If I say select the snapshot, I see exactly the same one I saw on the other side that they can select from. If I don't do a snapshot, say next. I'll just give it a quick dummy path here. Or let me rather do that again. I'll deploy this build. And this is where the naming conventions become quite pertinent from a development perspective. Now I see the same naming roles or names of servers that are sitting here that are assigned in my environment. And now I start to build out and target exactly the ones that I need to see and use from a deployment perspective. So at that point, the developer is able to complete the process and deploy out and use the environments they're building. But now the back-end piece is where the IT pro starts to play the core role. From a planning phase, I've asked a few questions. What software do you need? How many servers? How much infrastructure? How do you want to configure it? I need to build those templates up. And one real fact that I've taken out of the last 6 months of work is when it comes back to a showback or chargeback model to business. If we want to enable this for developers, that's great, but who's going to process those components for us when it comes to a finance perspective? So if we step one level out and go back to Virtual Machine Manager now, and we look at two key areas. So from wrong one. Templates. So if we start to look at these templates that are built up within Virtual Machine Manager, there's three key things we want to populate. One is the information that sits inside of this virtual machine. We don't want the developer to deploy this VM and then come back and say later, I also need IIS and I need .NET 2.5, please. IT Pro has to go away and deploy it to the servers. Or the developer works their way around engaging with the IT Pro and does his own work on the other side. So let's become descriptive about what's inside of that. Let's add the relevant roles or features or run the relevant scripts and components that are required when a template is created and is built out and used by the developer. And then assigning a cost center. Who uses showback or chargeback in their business today? Anyone. Was that a side of relief or a side of we don't use it? So very few. Who needs to or would want to move towards a showback or chargeback model? And the rest of you don't care about showback or chargeback. Okay. That is becoming a key piece from a business perspective to understand where is my money going? Where am I investing my components? So now the IT pro needs to understand from the business in the planning phase, where do I assign the usage of these resources in the bigger cost model, the bigger showback or chargeback model? And this is where we start to build out the cost centers and the actual quota points around how these resources are used in our environment. So whether it be a simple dummy cost center like this, or ideally filling into your standard process tools, when this gets deployed out and used, that cost center gets pulled up and assigned in your normal processes along the way. Okay. So all that we've looked at here really is the foundation piece from a virtual machine manager. How do I build those key components up, those nuggets around templates? How do I assign the relevant profiles to build up those templates? How do I put in the correct library for the developer to get access to? And how does the developer then take over and use it in his normal day-to-day job on the other side? So if we look back at the last step within Virtual Machine Manager, and we look at these profiles, from the planning phase, I've seen two examples of where this gets used in the planning phase in two enterprise customers. The IT pro literally snapshots the screen and sits in the workshop and goes, Mr. Business, Mr. Developer, which of these key components do you want filled out with what values? What licensing are we using? And what software do you want installed on these VMs as a developer when we roll these out for you? Do you want native roles and features added and it's done? Or do you want some custom scripts run once that piece is finished? Because ideally when a template gets rolled out, it's used end-to-end by the developer without really coming back to the IT pro. So all they do is they step through two things. Firstly, what is my naming convention? The IT pro should have that pat down. Basically, what licensing model? And then what roles or features do I want added to this? And do I want to run any custom configuration in the actual image itself using something like WSIM, the image management, to create an under 10 file, and natively configure the OS end-to-end at the bottom. So these pieces now become valuable to understand the planning phase. If you don't, you get to this point, we go back to the developers, hey, what would you like? That process becomes longer, kind of defeats the dynamic DevOps movement that we're talking about along the way. Any questions at this point around this piece, around building out and understanding the infrastructure? So IT should normally have this piece pat down. It's the developers who need to understand what can I use and get out of it. But at the same time, IT should understand what are developers doing when they build out environments. What's the purpose? What do they use it for? Why do they want to do this? Because it allows them to customize the artifacts they need on the virtual machine manager side. Okay, so take next level piece. So the IT now, the developers now have used their environments, they've run their testing, they've done all the different types of testing. They're ready now to start to move the software out, or possibly move it through a variety of phases and then get it out into production. What is involved in that? So going back to this framework again, I should have shown you the slide before I went into the demo. It would have made life a little bit easier to explain those pieces. I wanted to stop at this point when I showed you the slide, then climb into the demo, but this is where the integration gets done. This piece over here, in green, building out lab environments, test results, and performance monitoring. Number 3 on there, performance monitoring, is normally done when it gets over the wall into production. Well, let me monitor your application for you. Let's see what's going on. Let's monitor your server. Let's see how the app runs on top of that server. We're encouraging IT professionals, again, in the planning phase, agree on customizing and helping with the monitoring in your testing phase. Help monitor that. Use the Microsoft monitoring agent. Test the application for the developer. So when it gets thrown over the wall, we're ready to go. We understand the impact of what we're going to get on the other side. And also it'll help to enable developers to understand, are there problems with their code? Are there things they need to take into account? Is there any testing that should be changed? Should they change any components within the code itself or the structure? We've done that in the testing phase, not when our customers/users are using it in production. Okay. The next piece, moving out into release. And I want to spend just 10 minutes on this piece. There's a session after this, I think it's the room next door, which focuses purely on this piece. I just want to highlight 2 key areas in this to give you a view of Microsoft's roadmap around this tool set and integration with developers and IT Pro in the release phase. So we're going to look at, in the console, we're going to look at kind of 2 key areas. One is release paths, and how can IT Pros help assist developers in that piece. And how do we start to look at PowerShell desired state configuration playing a key role between moving from development phase and release paths into production on the other side. And how do we handle multiple environments? How do we take into account that we can provide an infrastructure for developers to use using our release tool set with Visual Studio? It's the same framework. We've got Team Foundation Server, which is ideally the management component for Visual Studio. We have a release management server, which is the management component of release management for Visual Studio. Within inside of that, we're going to have a look at 3 key areas. What are the release paths? So as an IT pro, how can I create the relevant tools or actions to allow a developer to build more into his actual workflows when he has these relevant paths built out? And how do I get involved in building those environments, either in development or in production, and I enable the developer to spin them up as he sees fit when he needs to release the code over the wall? So let's move across and have a quick look at that. Oh, sorry, I do need to position this piece first. This really is for the IT pros in the audience to understand this release flow that I'm going to show you now. So release paths, kind of an overarching component. On the left-hand side, you'll see the 4 different stages we're kind of going to have a look at now. So from a stages perspective, that's just the flow an app would take in the life cycle, so moving through the different stages. The different environments would be the actual components you build out from an infrastructure perspective, the servers that would sit and be targeted by the developers when they release their code out. The actions are what a developer would start to build out with his workflow. And from this little simple example, create SQL, configure some services, possibly run an MSI file. And then, right, the developer's happy, he approves, it moves across to the next stage. And so it starts to work through these different paths. The developer modifies and makes the changes as he sees fit, and it might be a bit of backward and forward between those two stages that we see over here at the moment. But once we're happy to go from test to pre-prod, an approval gets done. Whether it be just the developer, whether it be developer and business, that's down to each enterprise that would have their own workflows. But again, it gets approved, it now moves over. We don't start to just automatically let software move through the cycle. There has to be an approval process along the way. Now we move into pre-production. Again, lessons have been learned along the dev phase, along the testing phase. The rollout should be a lot smoother at this stage. Now at this piece, we're at the point where we say, right, are we happy to move into a live environment? Now the developer doesn't have the right on his own to say, yes, approve, move. We involve business. And business becomes a key stakeholder here to go, right, we've moved through these three phases. We're ready to go into production. Have we checked all the boxes? Is everyone happy? Yes or no? Engage with operations. Are you ready for it? This is when we're going to do it. And then authorize or move it across. That could be a change control board. It doesn't really matter. But the key concept here is that business starts to have an influence on how an application moves from a pre-production environment into a production environment. Then we look at it running in a live environment. Now business kind of hands over to the operation guys from a workflow perspective and goes, right, are you happy to let this go and be running in production? Yes or no? And what are the results? Successful, not successful, and lessons learned all the way back. So this is a very simple diagram, but I want to show this flow because when I take you across the console, it's sometimes a little bit hard to position these pieces. But I'm going to show you a few key areas, and one is how does the IT Pro build and enable tools or actions for the developers to use, and how would they use these in their environment, whether it be private or public cloud infrastructure that they're actually using. Okay, so this is a release management for Visual Studio. As I said, so this piece that you're seeing here now will be the next session in the room next door, I think it is. It'll be just purely focused on this. So if you look at that last slide I showed you plus this, and you realize this is a piece that you need to understand, learn about, I highly encourage you to spend some time in that session. I'm going to focus on firstly the paths that I kind of broke out for you now in that slide. And this really is where we start to build up a view of what is out in my environment. What are the relevant stages? Who are the provers going to be? Who's the owner? Is there something or a tick box or a script or a step that needs to be actioned before it'll actually move from one to the next phase? And is there an owner for these different components along the way? Now, these are just buckets. They're containers. You need to build these up yourself as a developer. But ideally, the IT Pro should be the one answering the questions around where's the infrastructure that these environments are going to leverage and use on the other side. If we go back to the actual workflow and the actual path itself, this would be where the developer would normally spend a bit of time building out across those different stages what is going to happen. So in those blue boxes I showed you, so SQL, do some services, do an MSI, that's where this flow becomes important. Go to the next stage, again, different steps along the way. But along that way, as IT, we can now start to enable the developers to be more dynamic by possibly giving them custom scripts or custom tools they can use either in those different stages and then they get to production, or allowing them to start to break out and go to Microsoft Azure on the other side. And those two areas really are down to what sits within inside of the actual toolbox that the developers get to use and work with. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a list of kind of action titles, and within inside of there's tools that are available to use. Currently, as IT pros, I'm sure you have a huge amount of scripts you use, possibly PowerShell, command line, batch files, that you use to customize or set standardization across your production servers. As servers come in, we implement this process. Now, as a show of hands, who's attended any of the desired state configuration sessions this week? Okay. For those that didn't put their hand up, I highly encourage you to pull that content offline and have a look at that content. Because we announced on Monday the integration of DSC into release management to ensure that when an app moves from one stage to another stage, firstly, before it goes out, the environment is in a set state. Same in production. Once it gets thrown over the wall and it's running in production, let me ensure that state stays consistent over a period of time that we might run the relevant configuration checks. So that was an announcement we made on Monday, and coupled with yesterday, the ability to now use DSC with Linux, and it gives us a huge amount of power as IT pros to enable developers along the way. And it is not really rocket science on actually completing these components. If I step back and have a look at that actual toolbox itself and where I build these out, it's made on two things: an action, which is based on the tools that it uses as the foundation. If I open one of these actions, so start in Azure VM, and I drill down into that, all that it's asking me for is, what component am I using? What are the actual arguments that will be relevant? And what are the parameters that sit inside of those arguments? And that's available. It's just a PowerShell script. That's all it is on the other side. As a developer, I just select the ones I want, and I drag them to my workflow. And I complete the relevant parameters in my workflow for the actual results that I want to achieve. But if we look back as IT pros at our current environment, what can I use now? So scripts, tools, executables, and start to pull it across here to ensure that developers start to customize and standardize based on my set of rules that I might have out in production. So again, they're in their early stages. I'm already building some sort of standardization before we even get to pre-prod and prod along the way. Again, ideally, in the planning phase, this is where the IT pro starts to spend time discussing with the relevant development teams. How can I use my existing tool sets to make your life a lot easier than when you give us the application and we have some backwards and forwards because your configuration is not my standards that I have in production? And for operations, how can I ensure once it's come over the wall, your standards are exactly what I'm used to from a support perspective, especially if that support perspective is a third-party vendor and they are charging us for anything along the way that might be right or wrong. So how do we start to build this in right from the early phases to ensure that we have, or we limit our configuration drift once we start to get into production? So that's a real whirlwind tour through release management. Almost said the old name, put some money in the jar. But the key piece over here is, before I move across the next section, as IT Pro, how can I provide value back to my development teams to ensure that when they run through these different stages, they're already getting used to a set standard I might have in production on the other side. If I now move back to the section over here, just taking time into account, kind of the last piece of the session is, once that application is moved across into my environment as an IT Pro, firstly, as a developer, what can I get from you from an operations perspective for monitoring? And as an IT Pro, what can I enable and make dynamic for the developer on the other side with this application running in production? I made the comment a few minutes ago, well, what about monitoring in test as well? So you could feed it back into Operations Manager, or you could just use the Microsoft Management Agent and allow developers to fill their own results and filter their own results in that testing phase itself. So either way, either standalone in testing or falling back into a full-blown Operations Manager, that'll be different down to each person in this room. But the key takeaway is, how do I enable the developer to understand what's happening in his application at all the stages possibly of the life cycle for that app? So from a monitoring perspective, I'm going to show you application performance monitoring. I'll show you the integration piece that need to be done first between Team Foundation Server and Operations Manager. I'll then show you the results of moving an alert into a work item and back again as an alert and making the updates. And then we'll take a step back and look at how does a developer get more out of operations when we start to look at the IntelliTrace integration with Operations Manager as a useful tool. I spoke to you a little bit about DSC. So now how do we start to take all these learnings of what we're monitoring and it's live and we are understanding that maybe our set standards as IT pros in production need to maybe be modified to cater for this move of enabling developers? Well, it's fine. If we're going to start to look at using DSC, we just start to change our configurations. And that makes it a little bit easier to adapt to move along this way. If I'm not using DSC and I'm using custom scripts and custom standards, I need to start working through all of those. So again, if you haven't attended any of the DSC sessions and don't understand the value of what I'm talking about now, I highly encourage you to pull one of those sessions down and see exactly the value of using DSC in this environment. So we kind of left off here in the last section. We've built out environments. The developer can start to target them and use them from a release management perspective. How do I now start to do the integration between these components? And how do I allow all two personas on the bottom left-hand side to get value out of monitoring? And one key important piece, how do I stop the finger pointing and finger blaming of who's done what? I need to have a central, single set of truth in an alert, in a work item. So the developers see exactly the same content that the operations or help desk people are seeing when an alert is created or alert is generated. None of this different contexts, and no one knows what the real problem is. There has to be a single source of truth, and everyone gets to troubleshoot when it's their turn, basically. So let's move across quickly to this. A show of hands, who has not seen Operations Manager before? SCOM? Have not seen it. Okay, quite a few. Okay, cool. I'll take you through a World War II of SCOM in 30 seconds. So the first piece is the integration between Operations Manager and TFS. There's a couple of management packs to be imported. Those URLs are in the slide deck, so if you want to look at doing this, you can get that information straight out of the slide deck. But once I extend what Operations Manager knows with the relevant management pack, I am able to do a work item synchronization with TFS. I'm now able to do the actual .NET monitoring and pass it across to TFS on the other side. This TFS work item synchronization, a work item is just almost a task. So for the IT pros in the room, it's a task that can be assigned to a developer as an action that needs to happen, a piece of code written, a bug fixed, etc., etc. So on our side as operations, it's called an alert. On the development side, it'll be an operational issue, that'll be the type, and it'll be called a work item on the other side. But again, we're looking at the same contents across both areas. The integration is quite simple, actually. What do you want to look at? And where should I send these alerts and create work items on the other side? What location? Should I push this as Operations Manager? Again, I need a service account. That service account needs to have a contribute access in TFS. So when you speak to your developer and say, right, I've created a service account, he needs to give it the relevant contribute access on the TFS side to allow Operations Manager to move these alerts across and create work items on the other side. So again, nothing really special around this. Again, just a bit of communication between the two parties to set up, when the alert comes in, where do I send it, who's it going to be assigned, and who's it going to be, what areas are going to actually be placed in. The last piece, and this is the second time I want to refer to my experience with enterprise customers. These two screens I'm going to show you now, the two tabs, I've seen this where they sit in a workshop and they work through these tabs in the planning phase. Right, I can monitor your application like this. You tell me how you want it monitored, because you understand your application. What thresholds do you want? What am I looking at? Do you care about exceptions? Do you care about performance? Do you care about both? Within exceptions, do you care about auditing? Do you care about networking? You tell me as a developer, what do you care about and what do you want to see? I'll go away and I'll fine-tune it so when the application is ready, we know what to look after. Opposed to an application comes over, we start to monitor it, and we just get alerts. Or we get no alerts, depending on the configuration that's not done correctly. So these two tabs over here, so from a monitoring perspective, as a developer, what do you care about? Do you care about performance? Do you care about exceptions? You tell me. I'll do both for you if you want. Within inside of that, what thresholds do you want? When should you know that I must send and create a work item on the other side for your application? Now, we're looking at the back end from the server perspective. If I look at the client side, again, very similar look and feel. The client's experience on the other side. What do you care about from your user's experience? How long should certain components take? Maybe it's e-commerce. Maybe you don't want one click to take more than a certain few milliseconds, as that person might go and shop somewhere else. But as an IT pro, I'm busy looking after my infrastructure. I don't know your experience you want on the other side. So literally, these two tabs, I've seen them work through them line item by line item and add those components in. Right, are we happy with that? Yes, sign off. Let's start developing the application now. Developer goes away, starts developing his application. IT pro goes away and starts to build out the infrastructure requirements on the back end. So when the developer starts to push his code out to test, we start to monitor with the exact items that were selected in the planning workshop. And we fine-tune, because now the developer gets a view of, well, no, those thresholds are way too low. I need to increase those thresholds. No problem, we'll fine-tune them. We haven't even got to pre-production yet, let alone production. And that's a great example of bringing down the time it takes to write an application, as well as the time it takes once I start to get all these amount of alerts coming into my console as a help desk person on the other side. So little things like that make it a real-world scenario to start fine-tuning how developers and IT and business in the planning phase can start to work together quite quickly. So, okay, so configuration piece and settings that are required. If I now move into the actual monitoring piece itself, for those that quite a few put their hands up around, I haven't seen SCOM before, this really is the dashboard, the console. I can apportion this out as a dashboard as I see fit to developers, business. That's a customization that IT pros can do, and only show the information that is pertinent to that persona. It doesn't have to be the whole full-blown location console itself. All I want to focus on really is having a look at the workflow now between an alert has come in, I push it across to Team Foundation server, and the developers take over and they do what they do best on the other side. So if I go and have a look at, say, application exception, there's a new one that's come in. I'll just generate some more retail space here quickly. The bottom piece over here becomes quite important, this alert description. Because this piece over here, when my mouse decides to respond, this piece over here is the single source of truth that moves between operations and developers. This is what's wrong, and here's the URL that you can go dig a little bit deeper into. So if this is an operations person, he knows what's going on, you'll click on the URL and get a view of the event window, and you can drill into exactly what this alert is. Now, as a help desk person, you might go, oh, well, this is some sort of application failure. Great, I know, I'm going to send these across to engineering. They'll have a look at it, and they'll drill down into it themselves. So this little bit of information you see over here gets carried across and created along with the other contents in the work item in TFS on the other side. So if I move this piece now across to the engineering team, so when we released Service Pack 1 early last year, we just extended the ability to go assign to engineering. As soon as you click and do that, the one thing that kicks into play is the service account you assigned a few minutes ago now takes that alert, goes across to TFS, creates a work item with a type operational issue. And you'll see in Visual Studio how that plays out in a few minutes. But when that piece gets done, Operations Manager stops. Now it's up to the developers to do what they do best and go, right, I accept this work item. I'm going to assign it to this development team or this developer. And they will take over and they will action and work on it themselves. Operations don't go and assign it all the way down to a developer on the other side. Because the developers understand the layout of teams, the layout of who does what piece on what code. They will take over and do that piece. At this point, Operations Manager stands back, and that alert has gone across and been assigned to the developers on the other side. Wow, we assigned that alert on the other side. It's quite an impact outside as well. Wow. Or is that me breathing on the mic? I hope that's not me. Sorry if it is me. Okay. Back to Visual Studio land. If I, as a developer, log in, I've got a query I've created by the type of operational issue. I just say, show me all the work items with a type operational issue. It just helps me filter this result out. And here's a new one that came through a few minutes ago. And now I can take over. So possibly in your environment, there's a persons who sits and filters all these work items. It goes, right, an application error has occurred, right? Let me have a look at that. I'll open it up. I haven't taken ownership of it yet. I'm just having a look at it. In the bottom, you'll see exactly the same content that we saw in the alert on the other side. Same description, same URL. Everyone seeing the same source of truth. Developer man can go, yes. Let me click on that event ID. Let me have a look at that and see exactly what that's about. And then I will decide if I take ownership of this, because maybe I look at it and go, you know what, that's actually SQL's caused the problem in whatever. No, I'm not taking ownership. I'm reassigning it back to the operations team. Please send it to the SQL team on the other side. So I haven't taken ownership. I haven't actually assigned this to any developers on my side. Or if I look at it now and I go, right, this is a problem in the application, I will save this, I will take ownership, and then I will assign it out to my developer in my team. Okay, so I can open this up and have a drill down and say, yes, okay. I know exactly what this is. This is definitely one of our problems. I'm going to pass this on to one of my team members or a vendor who might be doing the support for my application. So I'll close that down, go back into that alert again, say, yes, I'm happy with that. I will accept that. I'll do save that work item. I'll go back to Ops Manager, do a quick refresh, and see if it comes back as acknowledged based on Windows minutes. Or either way, it's going to come back and say acknowledged in a few seconds. Or should in theory. If it doesn't, I'll be on the brown bag blowing in a few minutes. Now, once this has been accepted, it now sits as a work item available to assign. Until I said accept and I save that, I can't assign it to anyone within my environment. So now I can go say, right, assign that, and I'm going to assign it to my dev team or dev person that's dealing with my social components. I'm happy with the severity, or actually, you know what, it's actually very important. Make it critical, save. And now whenever dev social 02 user logs in, he will see that work item assigned to him. It's his task. He knows what he needs to do from a work perspective. Anything dev 02 does, or dev social 02 does now is, again, he'll open the event ID, he'll have a look at the window and see exactly what's going on. So yes, open up. It's available for me. Give me a view of what exactly is going on. Show me more information. Let me drill down to that. So now I get a view of exactly what is happening in the code when that exception occurred on the other side. Give me a deeper view of allowing me to use IntelliTrace, one of the Visual Studio tools. Give me a view of what's gone exactly wrong in memory at that point of time when this exception occurred. Say open. Now, come on, there you go. So right, give me a view of that. Let me debug. I'm going to walk closer to my brown bag if I don't see the next screen I need. Okay, that was not the one I wanted, so I'm going to go blow my brown bag in a few seconds. But ideally at this point, the developer with the relevant symbols available to him can actually open this up and start to debug that piece of code and work with it immediately. At no point has this developer gone to Visual Studio and gone to look at anything else. He's just opened up a work item, and he's got all the content stored within Operations Manager. Now, this might not be enough for him. He might look at this and go, I need another 10 minutes before this happened. I need to know what happened on a different page on this website before the person went to checkout, possibly. I need to understand when he selected that item, what actually happened then. Right, I need to repeat this. But I need more given to me from a process perspective. So no problem, go back to my call or my work item. So you know what, I need some more information. Say awaiting evidence, go back. Please give me a longer log file. Say that work item. Hey, it got acknowledged quietly, nice on the other side. And that should say awaiting evidence in a few seconds. Now, ideally, what an operations person can do, and this is where the integration with IntelliTrace has come into play, is that once that it says awaiting evidence, there we go, it's changed. I now have the ability that my console has changed on the bottom right over here to allow me to start to pull IntelliTrace logs. So that wasn't there until I saw awaiting evidence coming up at the top. And now, as an operations person, I can go in and say start IntelliTrace and run for longer. And then either let my tester, my guys, my UAT, or the user who's logged the call go and repeat that problem. And we'll grab a longer snapshot. We'll grab that, either put a network location or attach it to the alert and assign it back and update the work item on the other side. So now all of a sudden there's a very simple look and feel of the flow of an alert coming in and moving backwards and forwards between those two components. Key takeaways over here, a single source of truth. Everyone's looking at the same error, the same content. There's no finger pointing, there's no backwards and forwards anymore. He has the content, go and repair it. Doesn't matter who does it, ops, dev, SQL, whoever. We're all looking at the same content. And we're allowing each persona to sit in the tools they know. I don't have to give a console to the developers to get their own alerts. Just stay in your Visual Studio land. You stay there, I'll stay in the System Center land. And we'll proactively work along the way. But now this little workflow I've shown you now is not going to work if you don't understand the parameters of what you need to monitor correctly. It's not going to work if I don't know where to send it properly or who to assign it to. Or it's not going to work if my development team don't understand how to take those work items and start to workflow them from an assigning perspective on their side. And the backwards and forwards. Now, attached to all of that is I get a view as business of the actual SLA. How long did it take to go from that alert being generated to be assigned and created as a work item, to be assigned to a developer as his operational issue, and then resolved? Possibly backwards and forwards a few times, but how long did it take to give me that? So as a business, I get to understand what's happening in my environment at the different stages. Now think of what I've just shown you now, and I do all of this in the testing phase. I haven't got to production yet. I'm doing this in the testing phase. My developers can see exactly what's happening in the code before we even got to pre-prod, before we even got to production. They can fine-tune, make the changes. And yes, we'll experience something on the other side when we get to production at some point. That's nature. But at this point, I enable my developers to do a hell of a lot more before I even get to possibly testing, before I even go from testing to pre-prod, and then finally prod. So yes, there's effort required by operations or IT pros to get this piece working, but look at the benefit that when this moves into production, what you take over and look after. It'll probably be a huge difference in the amount of support calls you start to take from an application perspective along the way. Okay. So I know it's a real rush through all these different components, but ideally this is the starting point from a Microsoft perspective to engage with the IT pros and dev and business and say this is where we're going with our tools. This is the view that we have of the world, and this is the path we're going down. Ideally start to climb onto this bus and start to engage as the three personas and start to build those components up along the way. Now, we've created some additional resources around all these different pieces. I'm going to start to release those now in the coming stages as we go towards the end of this calendar year and start to provide more information back to each persona. So from an IT pro perspective, I will start to see more content coming down around how can I enable developers. As a developer, I'll start to see more content coming down the line about how can I use more of the infrastructure and tools available to me on the IT pro side on the other side. And really, this is the opportune time to start engaging as all three personas. Yes, you might need a brown bag now and then to kind of relax yourself and have that discussion. But I'm hoping you start to see the value of these different pieces and the benefits they can provide to each of those personas. So I want to show you 3 slides on additional resources to take away from this, around resources you can use offline, as well as resources from TechEd now, and going forward, the team that I kind of work within here at Microsoft, where we're going to start to channel all of our content down. So firstly, we've spoken about engaging in the DevOps piece, understanding the products. There's 3 areas. The Microsoft Virtual Academy, we just created a jumpstart about a week ago. It'll come out in the coming weeks, which will take that full life cycle end-to-end, that full framework, within about 5 hours that myself and my colleague David created and put together. It'll give you that full view end-to-end between the whole hybrid story, on-premises, public, both. Where does open source fit in? How do I use Microsoft Azure? How do I use System Center? Where does it all fit in a position? And from that base, we're going to start to release more information outside of on MVA, as well as across the relevant blogs that we own between ourselves. So looking at the Edge show that kind of David runs and owns from the DevOps perspective, there'll be regular content coming out there that he will interview and discuss with people within the program teams themselves. And the DevOps blog that we've started up will start to produce a huge amount of content to be used going forward. The content you see on this DevOps blog is driven in a big way from a business perspective and then directs you down to the technical pieces after that. So all 3 personas being catered across all of this content. Now, one thing that's very important for us is really to understand this messaging we're starting with literally since last week is, does this resonate with the audience? Would you use this? Is this beneficial for where you fit in this whole life cycle? And ideally today, from an evaluation perspective, is where you start with that information, in giving us that information back. Would I use these integration? Would I use these components? Do I see DevOps working in my environment? Am I affected by it? Do I have IT pros I can talk to? How do I engage with my developers? I'm business. How do I take care of these 2 teams called Dev and Ops? How do I work with them? We need that information back. That information is going to come back. It's going to help us to modify this framework in the next few months. So very, very important for us to use. First step, your evaluation from here for the session is very pertinent. Ideally, if you can start to put some more content back into that, that'll be a great takeaway for us to use. This last slide is the content around some pertinent sessions here at TechEd. The top one is David's one he did yesterday, and he did some nice demonstrations of where the Microsoft Azure piece fits into this whole story. You'll see the same framework slide, you'll see the same discussion, you'll see the same points. But where do I fit in the public cloud piece if I'm starting to break out and use a hybrid model? The other ones play to the DSC piece and the DevOps story end-to-end, and from a release perspective. So if you want to have this slide deck, please come grab me. I'll gladly copy it for you. If you want to download, I think it's available in the next few hours. It's quite quick normally once you log into the site. And ideally, hopefully, there's some good takeaways for you, and you'll get a view of where we're going. And I hope you got some good content out of the session today. And thank you very much for attending. Okay. Thank you. And technical decision makers, so IT managers, okay. And you deal with the previous guys every day and you fight with them, basically. Okay. I asked that question because it helps me just frame certain of the components as I go through the session today. It helps me just understand how to position certain components. And I think it's a good split 50, well, I'm not 50-50 because there's three questions there, but it's a good split between IT pro and dev and from a technical decision maker as well. So what are we going to do in this agenda? Well, firstly, I'd like to spend 2 or 3 minutes just giving you a view of Microsoft's view of DevOps and this movement, this developer operations, because very much for the last few years, like cloud, DevOps has been thrown about quite a bit in the last year or 2 or 3, since it's really started to become mainstream as an acronym. And then look at this new Microsoft framework that we're currently working on. It's kind of evolving, and I think it'll be evolving going forward. Just to understand, where do we actually position IT professionals? Where do we position developers? Where does business sit across all of that? How do they interact? How do they work? And then once we've understood that framework, I'm going to slot in the System Center and the Visual Studio tools to show you where they kind of sit currently and what our view is of going forward, especially with some of the announcements we've made this week around the tool set from a Visual Studio perspective and from a PowerShell perspective as well. that'll be the first, say, first 10 minutes or so, and then I want to break into kind of the nuts and bolts between the technologies, the actual consoles and the tools, to understand how to... Good afternoon, welcome to the session. My name is Morgan, I work at Microsoft. I work as a technical evangelist, and I have the pleasure of spending time with partners and with customers, working on and evangelizing really about our platform, so Windows Server, whether it be on-premises, whether it be in Windows Azure, or whether we use System Center to manage all those components. And over the last 6 to 9 months or so, started to work quite a lot closer with developers to understand this whole DevOps movement that is on the go at the moment. So I have a specialization in kind of those areas. So the title of this is the Agile End-to-End Story of Developers and IT Professionals. It's quite a long title, and I had to have interesting discussions to have the title put in because it's quite a long one. So there's a bit of a play on a few terms there. Firstly, the word Agile, and then playing with developers and IT pros, all in the same sentence. And that is the key topic that I kind of want to work on in the first 5 or 6 or 7 minutes in the session today, just to position quite a few key components and then climb across into the tool sets and have a look at the integration components and see the experiences across all of them. Maybe a show of hands in the room, just so I can understand exactly the audience. Who are IT professionals? You work with Windows Server, you work with System Center, and you fight with users. Okay. Developers. Okay. Cool. So you work with code and you fight with IT pros. Okay. Popping up all of a sudden that have gone from dev environments to production environments overnight, and there's users working on them. So little things like that become a real pain for all three personas, but it is reality. It really is reality across all these pieces. And ideally, the developers want to become more agile. They want to work faster. They want to get code out quicker. They want to get fixes out quicker, updates out quicker, feature sets out quicker. However, on the other side, IT Pro, which is this big cost center where business is investing money, is trying to keep the lights on, fighting fires, handling grumpy users. Understand they might not have a massive budget and need to have newer hardware refreshes. They don't get quite the ability to have. So how do they scale out what they've existingly got? At the same time, cater for developers to say, hey, you have some infrastructure, go and dev, go and test. Whereas opposed to, we don't have infrastructure, that's your problem. So they go and buy their own servers, they spin up some Azure instances, and they do their own work anyway. Either way, the work's getting done. The problem is we want to bring this whole DevOps movement closer and align the collaboration between all three of these personas. And that's sometimes a piece that's missed when you hear this word DevOps. It's just development operations. But what about the business? And we have got quite a key message going to be coming out in the next 6 to 12 months around Microsoft's movement towards this DevOps framework. Business is an integral piece along the whole way. And as I go through the next few slides, you'll see how that gets positioned as I show you the technologies and who the key role players. It's ready to position the 3 questions I asked the audience a few minutes ago. Who is business, who is developer, who is IT pro? And this is the common scenario. And if this does not relate to you, please put your hand up when I'm finished showing the slide. And then I'd love to come and shake your hand and then just understand exactly how you've got all this magic to work without experiencing what I'm about to show you. So if we look at this business and developer, business requires updates, new features, new iterations, changes to applications as the business evolves. As the business makes money and starts to do its normal day-to-day processes, it wants to evolve the application side as well. And that puts pressure back on developers. Firstly, faster versions have to come out, quicker updates, faster return on fixing bugs, et cetera, et cetera. So development becomes kind of stuck in an area where they need to work really quickly to push out faster results. And the life cycle of application development has changed in the last year or so around faster return and faster feature sets coming out. On the other side is our friendly IT pro. Saying, well, you're just throwing the stuff over the wall and the updates are getting done, but I'm bearing the brunt on the other side. I'm getting the users phoning me saying, hey, this doesn't work, I don't see this. Possibly I'm seeing performance impact on the infrastructure where the application is running, whether it's on-premises, whether it's public, whether it's a hybrid version of the cloud, doesn't really matter. But the IT operations are starting to get impacted based on these new iterations, new versions, or servers. Firstly, integrate those components. So if I'm an IT professional and I want to assist or enable my developers, how do I integrate System Center into Visual Studio? If I'm a developer, how can I go back and speak to my IT professionals who are running the System Center thing and say, please, I'd like to enable, I'd like to integrate, I want to get more value out of what you have currently got running in the infrastructure from a platform and from a management perspective. this little I, information I, you'll see it pop up now and then along through the slides. There is quite a vast amount of content when you start to look at DevOps and you look at Microsoft tool sets from a System Center and from a Visual Studio perspective. So kind of what we've done is put quite a bit of content into the notes section of this deck. So when you download the PowerPoint, or you come grab it afterwards from me, either way, you'll find there's a lot of URLs in those particular slides. And those URLs will give you the step-by-step guides, the how-tos, how do I configure, how do I integrate, what are the things I need to take into account when I start to possibly put the Visual Studio test agent into a baked image within VMM. How do I do that? What are the ways, the procedures, and what are the gotchas? So that'll be in the notes section. And I think as you'll see, the next 75 minutes are going to go really quickly. Ideally, please pull this deck down and pull out the pieces you need for your particular role, as well as your engagement and when you discuss with either one of those personas. Now, I'm going to show this one slide just to give you a view. And if you attended David's session yesterday, or you attended our pre-conf on Sunday, you would have seen this one slide.